Welcome to BALLBUSTERS Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you're new to this channel, or you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate. If you'd like to join the community debate, then go to nathanoakley.com and check out the Flat Earth Debate Forum to keep up to date with the community debate. Now, we are joined by John Quantum Eraser, Betty Von Velsen, and Slick James Johnson for this ball-busting edition about science. How are you all doing?
Yeah,
Hello.
great. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening,
Hello.
good evening, one and all. So there's been lots of talk about science at the moment, and John has prepared a very slick presentation, no pun intended, slick. And hopefully we'll kick off straight away and get straight into it. John, are you ready to rock and roll?
Well, not really, because we were talking the whole time, and we thought we were still doing some talking and some logistical stuff, and then boom, the show started. So I guess I can get ready. Hold on a second.
Oh, we can chit chat a little bit if you want to. Is there anything we need to? I was about to say housekeeping, but I don't think that's necessary on this show.
Yeah.
I was talking to Robbie Davidson earlier today, and I didn't actually know this, but he said that the gas pressure without a container argument has become a bit of a staple in Flat Earth, and he credited me with it. And I'm going to say right here, right now, that I take no credit for that. I understood the principle, but it was honed by John. So, John deserves the credit for that argument now being apparently filtered throughout the Flat Earth realm in terms of it being a useful argument for people to put at people. But if you don't understand what the argument I'm talking about, just simply tilt your head towards the sky and go, vacuum, you say?
Yep. But also with the scientific method, by the way, that he started that too. 2015, I think, with Robert Bassano, that you went through a presentation about the scientific method already.
Yeah, and we talked about a lot of this stuff. I mean, gas pressure without a container. I mean, that was, like I said, that was the initial argument that converted me to a flat earther in like 2 or 3 seconds. So it's a heliocentric ball killer. It chops the legs off right at the knees of the whole heliocentric reification fallacy model right there. You really don't even have to talk about anything more.
And then too, plus also, this show is basically the only one that was really talking about the scientific method a lot. A lot of the other shows were talking about a lot of things, but nobody was really bringing home the scientific method. But because of Nathan's show and John, you guys getting together, I think the repeating it kind of day in and day out made people stop and think, wait a minute, what's this scientific method thing? Let me look into this. And I think that's what's opening the doors a lot.
Still quite amusing when you see people saying, what's your independent variable in the chats, especially when no one's made a claim of science. That cracks me up.
Yeah, you see that a lot. You see also in every chat the scientific method being mentioned and what it entails and stuff. And yeah, I like that.
And the discussion that I was having with Rumpus, one of the questions that I had with him, because he was telling me about the bending of space-time. So that's when I asked him, I said, well, did you ever vary the bending of space-time so that you can see your results? And then that's when he was saying, well, no, we can't do that, but we can infer. I said, okay, so that's kind of okay, but the only thing is that's not 100% accurate, because once you just start inferring, now you're just basically declaring at that point.
Fantasizing.
Well, Rumpus should go back to the debate we had when I first came on the scene a few years ago and go through that presentation. I think it was Paper Explanator was moderating. I think it was it Sensi's channel?
Yeah, it was Earth discussions, I believe. Sort of a flat Earth debate discussions.
Right. And Nathan has that debate. Where do you have that, Nathan?
On my second channel. So I've just put it in the chat, actually. It's on Nathan Oakley channel.
Yeah, because
It wasn't a
Right.
presentation that you did. It was a sort of a distorted debate with a biased moderator.
If I remember correctly, I don't think things ended too well either for Rumpus or the moderator.
Yeah,
I-
eventually you started debating both of them instead of the one. I remember.
Yeah, that was
I
towards
think
the
the
end.
I was going to say, I think I'm sorry, Nathan, I'm jumping on you, my fault.
No, you go ahead. I'm done.
No, I was just going to say, I think that the problem that they're having, though, is that they think that it's okay to fudge the scientific method if it's not quite working out for what you want it for. In other words, if you can't come up with an independent variable, what they're saying is, well, okay, well, let's just bypass that portion of science and we'll just go ahead and infer, and then we'll just keep on going from there. And I don't think what people understand is you can't really just do that, because if that's the case, then anybody can do that. Anybody can come along and say, well, I don't have an independent variable, so I'm going to make a model, and then I'm going to infer, and then I'm going to make a conclusion and declare that conclusion as science, and then we can all just move on. And I think that's the biggest problem we're having here. You can't just substitute because you don't have a way to get around that variable.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the biggest problem because, I mean, I've decided to coin this as the how of the globe lie. If you can convince people with an empirical method that what you say has adhered to that empirical method just with a few choice words, that's an extremely powerful tool to convince people of nonsense. And that's precisely what's happened. We have pseudo-scientists masquerading as scientists, and they're not.
And they think that if they just quote a couple sources, or just say that, it's backed by consensus, or, they think that this gives weight to the idea that they can just bypass science, because what they do is think that you could just basically, bury it in all of those people. And, so it's just one of those things where if you make a statement, you can push it by as long as you have a whole lot of word salad to bury what you just said, and then you just claim at the end that you came up with something. And most people don't really stop to, look into it, because they heard that word science. That's all they needed to hear. So what they think is evidence and proof is nothing but a declaration.
Yeah, well, hopefully that's what's being highlighted tonight, and like you say, over the last 6 to 8 months on the debates in terms of what is and is not science. And now I think it's coming to the point where people appreciate the reason why it's important not to abuse these terms, because that's precisely how we've been deceived. Shout out to Silver Umbrella for smashing the super chat. Really appreciate your support.
So do you want to get started here?
Let's do this.
Go ahead. Check my screen. See if it's popping up appropriately.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, so my idea was mainly to keep this informal. I'll stop after each section and we can, just discuss it. Any comments, any questions, any insights. And like I said, not a strict presentation. I don't feel like being strict. So let's just relax and go through this, and let's reason together. How about that?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Yep.
So I always start off with this. I try to start off with this. I've been doing this for a long time, and this is mainly towards the flat earthers. I want them to pay attention real close. So we have paleontology, anthropology, archaeology, geology, evolutionary biology. Yes, I'm still laughing. Theoretical physics, non-experimental. Then we have astrophysics, astronomy, and cosmology. Now, these guys are the ones we're focused on in this genre. But all of them are pseudosciences. Why? Because they claim science and they're merely masquerading as science. Because they're not sciences. Basket weaving is more scientific than these clowns combined. The first 6 pretenders can't get to the first step of the scientific method, which is science, and that is observe a phenomenon, natural phenomenon, without a time machine. So they can't conduct they can't even get into the scientific method. The last three in here in our genre, the final three masqueraders, these guys can't formulate scientific hypotheses because they lack viable independent variables. See, they're good on the first step. They can observe a phenomenon, right? These guys can look up in the sky and observe phenomenon. They're good. They can enter the scientific method. But what they can't do, they can't get to the next step. They can't formulate the scientific hypothesis. They can't do it. They can't figure out cause and effect. They can't manipulate the independent variable. Like I said, they can't isolate, test, and validate their dependent variables or their predictions. All they can give us is stories. And that's step 3 of the scientific hypothesis. And this is a hard stop. They can't get here. They can't do it. It's impossible. The true sciences are quantum mechanics, physics, genetics, chemistry, biochemistry, and biology. Now, caveat with this last guy. I'm not talking about the glorified secretaries and collators here. I'm talking about cellular and molecular biology, maybe a little bit of microbiology in there. It just depends on what their claim is. If it's not scientifically validated, that is experiment, and it hasn't followed the scientific method, then it's not science from these guys either. From any of these guys, by the way. I mean, this is just carte blanche. Okay, this is science, whatever they claimed, and it's true. It's scientific evidence. No, it has to be accompanied by experiment, preferably repeatable and repeated. So it's not a get out of or not a pass go, without experiment just because of your name, right? So what's happening here is the flat earthers have realized, most of them, that these guys have lied to them, right? And they think, okay, well, this is science up here. So when we have the actual true sciences claim something, well, we're just going to put these guys in this group and say, these guys have all lied to us. Wrong. These are not sciences, they're pseudosciences, and these are actual sciences. So don't make that mistake. You're going to go to war against these guys. The door is going to shut on you very quickly, right on your nose and your feet. So like I said, each claim from any of these disciplines have to be accompanied by experiment. If no experiment, I don't care who you are, it's cod, swallow, horse, pucky. If you're claiming scientific evidence, it's got to have this. Period. End of story. Like I said, do not fallaciously indict the actual sciences as pseudosciences, right? Don't do that. That's a huge mistake. All right. Any comments, questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Insights?
I've got a comment. So I'm going to read out a comment from the chat first. So Rob Vanderclock says, at Nathan Oakley, he's mistaken. They're not pseudoscience because they didn't claim to follow the scientific method. Now, I'll follow this up by saying that I think this is a slightly paraphrased quote, but science is right whether you like it or not. That would be from Neil deGrasse Tyson. Not an exact quote, but close enough. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. He's an astrophysicist, is he not?
He most certainly is.
So the words science is right whether you like it or not is relevant because it's true if you've adhered to the empirical method of science, which he cannot. So, Rob, unfortunately, these people do definitely masquerade as having the empiricism that is associated with the scientific method. Science is right whether you like it or not. Well, yeah, if you can adhere to this method, that's correct. But you can't, Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist. That's all I got.
Yeah, and the word experiment, people use that colloquially, and I think that that's also a problem. I think that we have to ask people, is it a scientific experiment that you're talking about, or is it just a test, like a test, right? Sort of research more. So I think that that's something that people mix up. Is it a scientific experiment, or is it just a test that you do without a formal hypothesis?
Right. So they're equivocating with the word experiment, right? Mm-hmm. They're using the word experiment in two or more different senses within the same argument. When we say experiment, in the scientific method, it is a scientific experiment. We're not talking about experimenting with recipes, experimenting with cars, experimenting with your sexuality. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a scientific experiment. We're going to get into the details of what that is and entails here in a few minutes. But good point. Yep.
Yep.
And another thing is too, is seeing, and one of the arguments that I'm finding is that these people really need that pass. In other words, they're asking, you really got to let me go with this. Just don't force me to have this independent variable. If you'll just allow me just to put that to the side for a minute, I can really make you understand. But just please, just let me do this. And that's kind of what their argument is.
Good. Anything else?
Oh.
No, but tell me when you do want to start screen sharing again, because I'm periodically taking you down.
Oh, you are?
I am, yeah, just for the chit chat bit.
Oh, well, you could keep the screen share up if you'd like. I'm not doing anything in the background or anything.
No, I didn't suspect you were. It just looks prettier if it's not. But yeah, I assume you want to screen share again now, and I will.
Yeah. Okay. And one caveat too for Anthony out there. There's no pictures in here. All right. Not putting any pictures in these presentations anymore.
Well, you did a lot with nice colors, so
That's right.
kind of nice on the eyes. So, what do you make of that, Nathan? You don't think that's pretty?
I'm colorblind, so it makes no difference to me.
Oh, righty. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So you can go ahead and screen share. Sure.
Yeah.
Tell me when.
Yeah, you're on.
All right. So, from Michael Crichton, testimony before the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Science is nothing more than a method of inquiry. And what he means there is natural science. That's all it is. It's a method. Scientific evidence from the law dictionary, the testing of a hypothesis or theory that is objective and in a controlled environment. Now, you guys see any equation models or pictures in here? I didn't think so. So, natural science, let's keep it simple. Is the inquiry a cause and effect question or genre? Or B, what is question or genre? That's, if you make a claim or somebody makes a claim to you, that's the question you have to ask yourself within their claim. If you're trying to investigating something, that's the question you have to ask yourself. Because this is the go button. This is the algorithm. If it's A, you're good to go. You can, step right into the scientific method. You're fine. There could be some obstacles down the road, but you're good for at this point. B, what is good? You can't even enter the method. Can't enter it. Don't even waste your time. So, what is the scientific method? Now, I wrote this down from memory about 10, 11 years ago from grade school. I remember this being up on my 5th grade general science. Now, that was back in the day. They probably don't do it in 5th grade anymore. I don't even know if they do it because, my kids went through school. I got teachers telling my kids that there is no scientific method. So I'm going to deal with that. So the scientific method. Now, I highlighted these 3 steps because the rest are basically administrative and logistical steps. Not that they're not important, right? But what we focus on are these 3 steps. So step 1, observe a natural phenomenon. Step 3, construct a formal hypothesis. Step 4, test an experiment, right? Those are the big guys. You can't have science without these 3. Period. From University of Rochester Physics Lab, scientific method has 4 steps. Now, they broke them up into 4 steps. Observe and describe a phenomenon or group of phenomena, same thing. They could have put 2 and 3 together. They said formulation of a hypothesis and a hypothesis to predict. They separated them. I don't know why they shouldn't have, and perform experimental tests. It's more or less the same thing I set up here. So, from Physics About the Scientific Method, The number of steps varies from one description to another, mainly when data and analysis are separated into separate steps. But this is a fairly standard list of 6 scientific method steps. Very important, which you are expected to know for any science class. So before you step into science class, any higher education science class, you're expected to know this. When I was in university, guess what? They didn't go over the scientific method. We were expected to already know it. Right? Makes sense? In summary, the king of the scientific method is experiment. It's birthed from the queen, hypothesis, which is birthed from the first step of the scientific method, observe a natural phenomenon. These are critical, indispensable steps. If these aren't in your scientific method, then you don't have a scientific method, in other words. You cannot have science that is natural science without these 3. Can't do it. 66% of the experiment is the hypothesis. 50% of the hypothesis is the natural phenomena observed. It is your dependent variable in your hypothesis. I'm going to stop there. Questions, comments?
Does anyone want to go first, or I will if not?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The order. So if you look at what you've got as step 4, test experiment, the most common thing we have occur is that people will substitute the observed natural phenomena for the test experiment, right?
Yes.
So an example of this would be something like Cavendish balls. So you say, okay, what's your natural phenomena that you're observing? And there essentially isn't one. We never observe mass attracting mass in the natural world. That does not happen. But they then point you to the experiment. Well, in the experiment, it's like, well, that's not step 1. We don't go to an experiment. We first observe a natural phenomenon. So what's the phenomenon in this instance? Well, it's observed within the experiment. Well, that's not a natural phenomenon. So when people say you can't use man-made equipment, well, no, that's an oversimplification of what we're saying. We're saying that the observed natural phenomenon has to be a natural phenomenon as opposed to conjured within the experiment itself.
Precisely.
Yes, and one of the things that I'm running into is that what they seem to be doing is that first they make a declaration, and then once they make that declaration, they term that as observed phenomena, and then they go forward. Now, this is what I'm experiencing in a lot of conversations that I have. The observed phenomena is substituted for a declaration, followed by, that's when you start going with the experiments or what you call experiments, but it's all based on not observed phenomena, but declared phenomena. Like, in other words, when they say an apple falls from a tree, they declare that's a force that caused that. And then what they do is put the mathematics together to show that force. And then what they say is, aha, look at this piece of paper here. I've just shown that that was a force that caused that apple to drop. But see, that was just declaring what the phenomena was rather than doing the systematic experimentation really needed to find out what the cause of that effect was.
And they also don't want to do the experiment, but they say, well, we observe something and we take a lot of data and make extrapolations from that data, have some statistics and have predictions from that. And they say that that's science because they say there's multiple scientific methods instead of the method. And yeah, that's wrong because we have to deal with the natural science, right? So you have to know the cause and effect, and that you have to test with an experiment. So only collecting data is not doing it.
And then also, once you just come out and make that declaration, see, now all of a sudden, hold on one second. Take over for me. 1 second. I got a quick emergency.
Okay.
No problem.
Yeah, it was a good point that Betty brought up. It's scientific method. Not z. It's not methods. It's method, right?
Yeah.
The difference between singular and plural. There's a method. You'll never hear scientific methods. Only people talking gibberish. Every single thing that you read will always say method, right?
Yeah, they bring up these other sort of scientific methods of them, and it usually contains other kinds of fields of research. I would say not experiments, but it's research in social studies, economic studies, and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, we're going to go over a couple of those here in the presentation. Yep.
Yep.
Right, should we carry on?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Observation is the first step in the scientific method. The first process in the scientific method, see that? There's no S on the end of that, involves the observation of a phenomenon, event, or problem. That's the first step. No phenomenon, this is from Niels Bohr. No phenomenon is a phenomenon unless it is an observed phenomenon. He's saying that for a good reason, right? And it's the first step of the scientific method. It's not ask a question. See, you know what? See, science buddies, let's go ahead and do it. See, what happens is when you say scientific method and you get a pretender clown around, what they're going to do, right? They're going to go to Google and they're going to push scientific method. Right, put that in there, and what they're going to do, they're going to go to images, and they're going to hit the first one up here, right? You all see that? It says, first step, ask a question. That's not the first step in the scientific method, right? Anybody can ask a question. Are globetards idiots? That's a question, right? Is that available for scientific inquiry? No, it's not. So it's not ask a question, for crying out loud. Now, this subject, natural science, the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment, right? So, physical and natural world. They're juxtaposing the physical and natural as opposed to the non-physical and supernatural. That's what they're doing. Example, can you please identify the non-physical natural for me, please? I'd like to see that.
Ghosts.
Oh, go ahead.
Ghosts.
Ghost, right. All right. So, natural world. Let's go through some definitions on what natural and natural world means. All right. So I made these kind of big. I emphasized them. I mean, they're almost grotesque. So I can imprint these things on people's retinas because it's just not getting through. So the natural world from Merriam-Webster, all of the animals, plants, and other things existing in nature and not made or caused by people. From Oxford Dictionary, natural, existing in or derived from nature, not made or caused by humankind. From vocabulary.com, natural, something that comes from nature rather than being man-made. You see the juxtaposition here for the fourth time. Natural, from nature, not artificial or involving anything made or caused by people. Okay, do you guys see these, right? I will guarantee you within the next week, somebody is going to come on and argue that natural and man-made objects are, or caused by man, are the same thing. It's going to happen. I know it is. It's probably happening right now in chat. So, just for argument's sake, let's entertain this first argument and allow man-made objects as natural phenomena and see how it shakes out. Let's just entertain it. So, from Kennesaw State, A law describes what nature does. A theory explains how nature works. Okay? So, brain surgeons, are they talking about lawnmower theories and toaster oven laws up here? I mean, let's pull up the laws of physics and let's see if we can find some lawnmower theories in here. Because they're man-made, they're part of the physical world, right? We should have loads of these. I should be overwhelmed in databases running into these. Pendulum theories or pendulum laws, bowling ball theories and bowling ball laws. Yeah. Listen, if you think this, right, you'd fail 5th grade general science. And full stop. I mean, this is preposterous that we'd have to go over this. Furthermore, as we'll see below, the entire goal of the scientific method is to elucidate or reveal cause and effect relationships. Well, aren't man-made objects caused by man? Why do we need to scientifically investigate it then? That's it. Go ahead. Comments?
Yeah, maybe Betty or Slick would like to give some examples of ballers giving us man-made devices as phenomenon.
Well, of course, the pendulum, Foucault's pendulum, I think, is one of them.
I get
Cavendish.
that.
Go on, Slick.
No, I was just going to say that too, Cavendish, and the thing with the scales. You see, it seems like that they always have to insert something that's not really needed. You know, I was giving somebody a simple example earlier. I was saying that if I pick up a brick off the ground and I drop it, everything is really accounted for why that happened. I don't really need to add anything different. And that's where the argument went into, but yes, what if you put that brick on a scale? Now, when I picked up the brick and dropped it, there was no scale anywhere in sight whatsoever. I was able to understand exactly what happened without any man-made device anywhere near me. But see, they need those man-made devices to make their declared observation a thing. See, that's what they don't understand. You don't need these things. The natural world accounts for itself. But their argument is, and you'll hear it every time, they have to bring in a man-made device. Natural world phenomena on its own, they cannot deal with that whatsoever.
And I also think that they get confused by things that are being discovered by mankind or man in things and call that science. They see kind of things happening, for example, when you do medicines and stuff, and you see a certain effect on a medicine or something in a discovery in a cell, maybe like something happens there that wasn't being seen before. And they say, well, look, science has proven this, but it's just a discovery that they made and not something that was really cause and effect thing going on.
Exactly. You got it. It's a what is rather than cause and effect. You got it. Good job.
Yeah. Well, I've got something to add to that. Sorry, Slick. I was just going to say, it's not just. It is cause and effect in their minds because they're using the terminology of science, and they're often attributing a cause to an effect. And what I mean by that is, the Foucault pendulum's the perfect example. As time goes by, I'm starting to love the Foucault pendulum more and more and more. Not necessarily just because it's layered in several layers of bullshit, but also because it's described as science and it's producing a claimed effect, right? Well, the Coriolis effect is just an effect. You can detail it within probably a couple of sentences. In fact, I will. So if you're on a rotating platform and you're holding a rubber ball, as you and the ball, while it's in your hand, rotate, you are on the single reference frame of the rotating platform. Now, at the point that you throw the ball, when you release the ball, it will travel in a straight line. Yeah, all things being equal. And that straight line, from your vantage point, as you continue to rotate on the platform, seems to take a curved path. It doesn't. It's released from your hand and continues in a straight line. But because you're continuing to rotate underneath the ball that you've just released, it appears to take a curved path. Now that effect is the Coriolis effect. Now there's no science in that whatsoever. I didn't need to mention anything about observing phenomenon or independent variables or causes and effect. It's just an effect on its own, which can be described, but is then attributed with the terminology of science. And the reason I say I like the Foucault pendulum so much is because, number one, as I've just said, it's describing effect, but number two, it's an effect they don't actually have. So it's clouded in nonsense because it's an effect that you'd expect to see in the heliocentric nonsense world of spinning balls in vacuums, but you don't see it. And because you don't see it, they have to kind of shroud it in this bullshit mystery and science to make it really confusing. So where you normally get a little bit of obfuscation to get away from the point that you don't actually have a cause for the effect, or the effect is manufactured in a machine. In this instance, it's just an effect that's very real. The Coriolis effect definitely exists and is definitely going to occur if you throw a ball like I described from a roundabout. But that's not occurring on the ball Earth, so let's call this science also and make it as double-speak nonsense, incoherent as you can to make it not obvious that they don't actually have that effect, right? So it's the other end of the scale. They're not trying to conjure mass attracting mass in a piece of equipment like Slit says. They're just coming up with this declaration of something, mass attracts mass, right? I declare. Let's experiment. It's actually the other way around with the Coriolis effect. So they've got this pendulum to tell people about how the Earth's rotating. And you're like, yeah, but it doesn't actually show that effect, does it? So, number one, the entirety of it is so nonsensical because the effect they're even demonstrating doesn't occur. It's just next level nonsense. The Coriolis, I love it.
Yeah, it's mass causes mass attracting mass. Get it right, Nathan.
That's the hypothesis in Cavendish, right? If mass, which is their independent variable in the Cavendish experiment, then mass attracts mass. That's the observed phenomenon. Like, what?
And here's
if mass, then mass attracts mass? Okay.
And here's the kicker to that. If you don't accept their version of what they're trying to tell you, they get upset with you and tell you that that cell phone and computer you're on, that was done by science. How dare you question science when you're using science? See, that's their go-to move when you're not buying what they're saying.
Because they're conflating the actual sciences. They're doing the opposite now. They're trying to conflate the actual sciences, quantum mechanics, which brought you all that technology, and put it in with their fairy tale pseudosciences, right? That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and saying that technology is science.
Yeah, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to make you ashamed to question what they're trying to tell you because they're trying to play on your sympathy. In other words, well, I'm using a computer. Maybe I should be grateful that I have a computer. And if you make a declaration, I guess I should accept it because I got all of this technology around me and it's all done in the name of science. So whatever you declare, I should accept it with no problem. What is wrong with me?
Yeah, but
another Coriolis effect problem. How do they define it? I'm still getting people, because I ask them to define it. If anyone brings up Foucault pendulum, I'm asking them to define the Coriolis effect. Of course, they're not going to give me any citations because half of them don't know what, well, 3/4 of them don't. 99% of them doesn't know what citations or references are. So what they tell me is hurricanes and toilet drains. That's their Coriolis effect, when it has absolutely nothing to do with those things. They're just parroting them from Wiki or from what somebody told them. It has nothing to do. Listen, clouds are not apparently deflecting anywhere. Neither is toilet drains, water drains. They're not apparently deflecting the water in them, right? So it's a joke.
Absolutely.
Hey, I was on with George Hatnook a little bit earlier, and he was he made a declaration that he did a test, a really long, drawn out test, and his conclusion was this can only happen on a globe Earth. It cannot happen on a flat Earth. So I asked him, I said, well, George, did you get this information peer reviewed yet? Because usually people don't make those kind of claims until they've gone, through the peer review the peer review thing there. So I was, trying to get him to understand that you're just making a declaration, because usually this body of science that you always claim, they seem to have a peer review process that you can just bypass. See, so this is the thing. You guys are just practicing and doing whatever you want and calling it whatever you want, but it's not real. It's just a declaration.
Yeah, we're going to go over peer review here in a few minutes. So we ready to move on?
We are.
Yep.
I'll just one more thing. I'll just shout out you for smashing the super chat, and I will add to that just because it's contextual now that George Netanyahu has been brought up. So George Netanyahu, that particular merchant of nonsense, went hell for leather on a guy called Brian Mullen a couple of years ago, when Brian Mullen pointed out the obvious, which is to say that if we have a Coriolis effect, like described with my roundabout and the ball, but instead of a ball, a plane, and instead of a roundabout, a rotating earth rotating underneath the ball or plane, then you'd have drastically reduced airtime travel one direction versus the other. And that led George Netanyahu, him pointing out that very fact, that obvious reality that would be necessitated if we had a Coriolis effect, led George Netanyahu to contact his employer and put his career at jeopardy. So these are the merchants of nonsense and the levels they will go to justify the quote-unquote science of an effect that doesn't happen on a rotating sphere Earth. And the reason it doesn't happen is because we are not on a rotating sphere Earth. There is no Coriolis effect. Anyway, I just wanted to drop that in. Do you want to continue, John?
Yeah, we good to go?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. This is a very important statement right here. You'll hear this echoed by a number of different sciences, actual sciences. So this is from the University of Rochester physics lab. The scientific method distinguishes science from other forms of explanation because of its requirement for what? Systematic experimentation. So if you don't have systematic experimentation, you don't have science, you don't have the scientific method, period. So an experiment, why is it so important? Well, what is it? Well, it's a hypothesis test. From Cigar or Luar's Introduction to Theory and Application of Molecular and Quantum Mechanics, the final arbiter of truth in science is experiment. Shocking. From the chair, Professor of Physics at Yale, Professor Shankar, the only way things change in physics is experiments. Everything is based on experiment. That's the only way we change our mind. From Richard Feynman, if it does agree with experiment, it's wrong, and that simple statement is the key to science. From Max Planck, experiment is the only means of knowledge at our disposal. Everything else is poetry and imagination. The scientific method requires that a hypothesis be ruled out or modified. Experimental test. Its predictions must agree with experimental results. Experiment is supreme. Experimental verification of hypothetical predictions is absolutely necessary. Hope everyone understands that. It's pretty cut and dry. So, what constitutes an experiment? Well, from Penn State University, there should be 3 categories of variables in every experiment: dependent, independent, and controlled. The dependent is the effect. The independent variable is the cause. The controlled or constant variables are ones that are held obviously constant, so as not to confound the test. From explorable.com, their research organization, there are 3 important variables that you have to remember when you're designing your experiment. This is such a coincidence. Independent variable, dependent variable, and controlled variables. From the Institute of Physics, when planning an investigation, students need to identify the variables that they consider significant and then select the ones they want to look for cause and effect. Cause and effect. Remember that one. If possible, any other variables that will affect the outcome of the experiment need to be kept constant during the experiment. Here are what is needed for an experiment. Shocking. Independent variable, dependent variable, and control variables. So let's go to Wiki. From the Smurfers' alma mater, let's see what they have to say about experiment. An experiment is a procedure carried out to support, refute, or validate a hypothesis. Experiments provide insight into what? Cause and effect by demonstrating what outcome occurs when a particular factor is manipulated. Boy, they're being real coy here. I wonder what that particular factor being manipulated is. All right. Comments, questions?
I mean, that's the essence of science right there, isn't it? You're dealing with cause and effect. So on screen, in bold type, that's what we're dealing with. And unfortunately, he's going to get his name mentioned again. Bob and Sly Sparkane claim experiments, and they are not establishing the cause of a naturally occurring phenomena. They're not establishing cause and effect relationships. They don't have independent, dependent, and control variables in their quote-unquote experiments. Now, this is why, I don't know if anybody's seen my most recent video, it ended up having, unbeknownst to me, I didn't realise at the time, but a BALLBUSTERS thumbnail. It just picked a random one, but there we go. I've changed that now. But in that particular video, I was pointing out that this will only get worse for those of you who don't quite get it yet. For every time you claim an experiment, you are perpetuating the means that we have been deceived by, when others, and I'll use something benign, which is to say an advert that claims that they've scientifically proven that they've got sticky tyres, then you'll hear those keywords and go, experiment? And you'll question, have they established a cause and effect relationship? Do they have independent and dependent variables? Are they studying a natural phenomenon? Are they varying and manipulating the cause of said phenomenon? Or not? If not, it's not science. It's not an experiment. This is what I've been driving home for a while, as most people are aware of. I mean, I hold out hope for Bob, I've got to be honest. Having listened to his video now, it seems to be the case that he stutters when these troubling instances arise in his explanations, so which tells me, subtly or otherwise, that he's getting it. Whereas there's people out there that are absolutely against anybody getting this, aka Tim Osman, who would much prefer that you stick with the I declare my pseudoscience and you all accept it because it's the mainstream narrative or the accepted consensus. Well, those people are the ones we're fighting against. Yes, there's plenty of citations that take you away from this empirical method. That's our point. There is still an empirical method. It's still very well defined. It definitely deals with cause and effect relationships. It definitely requires a phenomenon. It definitely requires you vary your presumed cause of that phenomenon. Those two things otherwise known as independent and dependent variables. These are the constituent parts of a scientific prediction, otherwise known as a hypothesis, and they will be varied and manipulated to cause said effect in an experiment. There we go. That's all I got.
One of the other things that I'm running into is that for some reason, mainstream indoctrinated people think that they have the authority. So in other words, if two people are having a discussion and they disagree with each other, well, they automatically trump. In other words, they're the tiebreaker because they're the authority. Just like going back to George Natanuk. He decided that Brian Mullen wasn't qualified. So he was in a position, because he's on the mainstream side, to make these kind of calls. See, so this is what they're always going to do. They're always going to put themselves in the position of authority. So if you present an argument, no matter how good or how well it's put together, they're going to declare that they're in a better position to judge. So you are automatically wrong and they are correct whenever they say so.
And what I would like to try to get clear is because I have people saying to me that time can be an independent variable. Can you elaborate on that, or is that something that will go on in the presentation? Or height, or
yeah, that's something. Don't hit on that just yet. It's coming.
Okay, because that's also a thing that they try to convolute the whole scientific method with doing independent variables that are not causing anything, basically.
Yeah, we'll definitely come to that. There's plenty of things that they claim are the cause, and yeah, like you say, what's height causing now? What's time? How's time being varied now? Anyway, I'm sure we'll get there.
Yep.
Hey, we ready to continue?
Yeah, in your own time, John.
Yeah, I wanted to make a short stop here, but I'll tell you what. There's no other citation I think I have that has caused, like, I've been bombarded within the past month, and panties are in a bunch over this one, right? This is McClellan, Christine, The Nature of Science and the Scientific Method, the Geological Society of America. So I want to just take time out and go over this, right? Now, this is a well-da statement. Let's go over it. Once the hypothesis has been established, it is time to test it. The process of experimentation is what sets science apart from other disciplines, and it leads to discoveries every day. An experiment is designed to prove or disprove the hypothesis. This is the one right here. This is what sends them over the edge, boy. If your prediction is correct, you will not be able to reject the hypothesis, right? It's over with this one, man. They're climbing trees, throwing bombs. I mean, this is going to require a futile and stupid gesture done on somebody's part. And I'll tell you what, those smurfers are just the people to do it. Right? So let's take a look at this. I mean, like I said, this is a well-done statement, but let's take a look at it. So, the nature of science and the scientific method. Of course, this is from the Geological Society of America. And you're going to say, well, John, you've already said geology is friggin' pseudoscience. What the hell are you going here for? Well, I'll tell you. A couple years ago, I was in a discussion with a guy, and look, you probably can't see this. Let me make it bigger. I was in a discussion with a guy when he dropped a citation on me. We were talking about quantum mechanics and entanglement and realism, right? And what he did was he actually provided a citation. I was shocked. I mean, actual citation, everything in it. And this is what he posted, right? Let me see if I can get this right. So, scientific knowledge is based on some assumptions after Nichols, 1998, such as, this is what he posted to me. The world is real. It exists apart from our sensory perception of it, right? Well, guess what? Quantum mechanics has pummeled this into the incoherent oblivion. And when he posted it, I said, dude, I just started throwing experiment after experiment at him. He just laughed, right? But this is what brought me to this particular, because I would never go to any geology or any other site. So that's why I came here. And I said, well, what the heck? While I'm here, let me go ahead and look over this and see what it has. Because, you know, most things, you know, you chew the meat and you spit out the bones. I figured, hey, there's probably some good stuff in here. So I started scrolling down and I said, whoa, they got a hypothesis. Look, the scientific method. Where's the at? Right? And scrolling down here, and I said, oh, they have an experiment down here. So this is what I just read. Correct? So I had no problem with it. I said, boy, that lines up with everything. That's a pretty good citation right there. So I'll grab it. And when I did, like I said, they just go off the reservation. And the reason why they do it, I didn't catch the argument in the beginning because I think it was under my feet. I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Why would there be such a blowback over this simple citation? And people started saying to me, well, the scientific method in this document is different than the one that you keep saying. I said, well, I don't really care. I didn't post the scientific method. I didn't cite it. All I did was cite the experiment. So, number one, your appeal is a red herring fallacy from the Black Lagoon. I mean, do you know the difference between citations and references? Yeah, that's a rhetorical question.
No, well, it shouldn't be because they don't.
Yeah, they have no clue of it. That's why it took me so long to grasp it. I mean, did you people graduate high school? For goodness sakes. And then what they did was, see, so you already seen what they said. So an experiment is designed to prove or disprove the hypothesis, correct? So that's stated right here. But what they did was they said, oh, goodness, well, it has a contradiction in here. So they went down in the study and look at this. So this is an insert, the talking points with this article, right? It doesn't seem like the author had, because the article continues before it or starts before it and continues after it, right? So somebody inserted this. And of course, it's punking out creation science, whatever that is, and intelligent design, right? So we know where this is going. But what they did was, and let me make this a little bigger so everyone can see it. They focused on this one, number 7. Scientists gather evidence as opposed to proof. And they said, oh, it's contradicting your statement above. I'm sitting there, whoa, wait a second. Number 1, evidence is proof. Proof is evidence, number 1. And it just contradicted the statement above. And they said, well, I was cherry picking. Well, aren't you cherry picking when you just pulled this out? Right? This makes no sense. You can't support this. Another good point. Citations are only in support of claims. They are not the claim. Does everyone understand that? They just support the claim.
Right. Can I, is that rhetorical or can I add something to that?
Go ahead, you can add something to it.
Well, I was going to say I did it earlier. So let's say I say my example again with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Again, this is paraphrasing. It's not a direct quote. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it doesn't matter. It serves its purpose perfectly anyway. Science is right whether you like it or not. Well, if he then goes on to say, literally in the next breath, the Earth is a sphere, does that mean that my contextualized quote taken in context suddenly means that I believe the Earth is a ball because he says it in the next breath? Absolutely not. It's a citation. Now, we're trying to point out, or I'm trying to point out in this very moment, that we have people who will use little phrases that come from science. So can you scroll up to your actual citation again, John, if you may? So there are key points that people will use in context that say something that makes it clear that science is proving something. And if you are to lend weight to your assertion that hasn't been done with science, it's very useful to drop in a statement like this. Once the hypothesis has been established, it's time to test it. The process of experimentation is what sets science apart from other disciplines. So suddenly, they've made you, the person reading, understand. No, something's being proven here. Well, that's good to point out, isn't it? And it's correct. And it's a useful citation. But does that mean if they say that there's 3-legged monsters from the Black Lagoon that are going to come and get us in the next paragraph, that we use that in the citation? No, that's not how citations work.
Yeah, exactly. And they're geology, right? Well, geology, pseudoscience, they're not going to see, they can talk the talk, but they can't walk the walk. That's the whole deal here. Here's another one. Look at this one. There is no such thing as the scientific method. Oh, really? Are you really going to say that? So let's go up to the title of this. The nature of science and the what? So there's no such thing as the scientific method, but your paper's titled The Nature of Science and the Scientific Method, eh? Please.
I didn't realize that this that section had just been stuffed in literally mid-sentence, but that's brilliant.
Right, exactly. Right. And I don't know what to say. Of course they're gonna, waffle and bally and friggin' contradict themselves in here because geology is not science, right? They're gonna do it. So I hope this solves. It's not, because I'm just gonna get bombarded again with it. It's really pathetic, and you're really only bashing your own head in with a shovel. But go ahead and continue to do it. All right. Does anyone have anything else to say? Yeah, I'm going to stop right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to add is that you have to be careful, just like the point that Nathan brought out with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Notice how he took two totally different phrases that had nothing to do with each other and then combined them to make it sound like one. See, this is a common trick. And what I would like to point out to anyone, especially flat earth people, listen to people when they talk. They'll always double speak and they'll just move right past you if you don't catch it. So they'll make one statement that's real and then they'll follow it up with a false one. This happens constantly over and over again. I'll give you an example. If you'll remember, Nathan, the other day on the show, Brenda was on. Now, remember when Brenda was on and you asked her a question and she went to describe her answer? What did she do? She slipped in the phrase, "we live on a sphere." And then she continued. You understand what I'm saying? See, so this is that sleight of hand trick that you have to be on the lookout for. They'll always throw in that phrase and then they'll keep on going, hoping you didn't catch it. And that's how they bind their point, by mixing truth with friction all into one and just stirring it up in the pot, hoping that you didn't catch it. And the problem is we've caught it. See, we know what's going on now, so this is over. This thing of observe and declare, I observe something and therefore it's this. Listen, guys, these days are over. It can't be done anymore. You can get mad, you can get upset, and you can make us, play on our sympathies that we use computers and we use phones and we shouldn't question science. But guys, it's over. It's not working anymore. That's all. It's a done deal. These sleight of hand tricks, they just will no longer work because they'll just be continually exposed more and more. Thank you.
Yeah. And what they now say is that science doesn't prove anything. And if they're claiming that, then their whole body of science behind the globe is bunk anyway, I think.
Good point.
What are they trying to defend then? That's my idea about it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. All right, we ready to move on?
Yep.
Yeah,
Nathan?
Good.
yeah, all ready to go.
All right,
Go.
scientific hypothesis. Let's go through this relatively quickly. A scientific hypothesis is your experiment statement. It expresses a testable proposed cause and effect. There it is again. Cause and effect relationship, the phenomena that was observed in step one, right? Boy, hypotheses are saying cause and effect. An experiment is also saying cause and effect. That's a really strange coincidence. California Institute of Technology physicist Sean Carroll arguing in the Edge that hypotheses aren't simply useful tools in some potential outmoded vision of science. They're the whole point. From the University of Rochester Physics Labs, a scientific method requires that a hypothesis be ruled out or modified if its predictions are clearly and repeatedly incompatible with experimental tests. Colorado State scientific hypothesis, a special kind of prediction that forecasts how the independent variable will affect the dependent variable. So if you have a scientific prediction, you have to have a scientific hypothesis, and you have to have an independent and dependent variable relationship. From Lowell C. From Cambridge, a scientific hypothesis is based on what? Cause and effect reasoning. A scientific hypothesis does not merely state X and Y may be related, but explains why they are related. From Drexel University, the scientific method is hypothesis-driven. One makes an educated guess to explain a what? Cause and effect relationship. From Physics to Bat, a hypothesis is an educated guess based on observation. It's a prediction of what? Cause and effect. University of North Carolina, an independent variable is the presumed cause, whereas the dependent variable is a presumed effect. The IV is the antecedent, whereas the DV is the consequent. From California State, formalized hypotheses contain two variables. Wonder what they are. The independent and dependent variable. So some hypothesis examples for you guys to go over. I'll just leave it here for a couple seconds. These are viable scientific hypotheses. Very easy to be done, like I said, on numerous occasions. I have yet, in 3 years, to find anyone, and I mean anybody, that can give me a viable scientific hypothesis on anything. It hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet. I'm not talking about Earth, the spinning ball Earth. I'm talking about just about anything. Give me a scientific hypothesis regarding anything.
Yeah, but they say that you make that scientific methods too narrow, so nothing will fit in it.
Oh, it's not my scientific method.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't make it
That's
up.
what I say.
Yeah, I didn't make it up. I'm telling you, every single citation in here, I was not involved in it.
Wow, that sounds familiar. Not you're not being involved with it, but you being accused of having too scientifically narrow a method. Right.
Exactly.
I don't understand, John, how you can make these statements with that computer you're using. Science gave you that computer.
All
So
right, I told you that. Slit.
how can you how can you speak up against science when science provided everything that you're using? I'm just throwing out there that's that argument you're going to hear over and over and over again.
Well, I've been hearing it for 10 years. I got the same response. They're conflating the pseudosciences with actual science.
Right. But the reason that I'm saying that is I'm really not saying that to you. I'm just using it as a joke. But what I'm saying is that to people that are listening, listen out for things like that. Listen when you're having a discussion with somebody and they tell you that that cell phone that you're using was provided by science, so you shouldn't be questioning it. Watch how many times you hear statements like that. That's it.
No, the cell phone you're using and the computer you're using works. Therefore, you live on a spinning ball. I mean, that's so incoherent. It's ridiculous.
But that is the argument that they're making. As incoherent as that is, that's their claim.
All right, we ready to continue?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so what we got when we started posting all these hypotheses and what a scientific hypothesis is, they thought they were clever with their little Google button and brought up complex hypothesis, right? So, a complex hypothesis from the medical dictionary examines the relationship between two or more independent variables and two or more dependent variables. All is well. Quantum eraser, Nathan, they're through. Well, rot bro, Shaggy. The University of Texas, there can only be one independent variable and one dependent variable in an experiment. Everything else that can impact the experiment must be kept constant or controlled. These are known as controls, and we already went over these in the examples above. This complex hypothesis nonsense is employed by epidemiological studies. These are correlation studies. And remember, correlation doesn't equal causation. From Cornell University, epidemiological studies, sing it with me now, can never prove causation. Game, set, match. Then we got, we were talking about math. I remember this one. Well, math is science, and that's where they got the variables from physics of math variables. A variable is any factor that can be changed or controlled. In math, a variable is a quantity that can assume any value from a set of values. A scientific variable is a little more complicated. Plus, there are different types of scientific variables. Scientific variables are associated with the scientific method, not math. Variables are the things which are controlled and measured as part of scientific experiment. Equations are not experiments. Anything here? Stop real quick.
I don't know. You wanted to give some example of correlation-based... I was going to say a swear word there. Correlation-based nonsense. Anybody? I'll do it if you don't want to.
Go ahead.
Well, you have the roosters that crow at dawn, and those cause the sun to come up. I mean, like that.
Well, no, that's more affirming the consequent. I was more sort of maybe going to give you an example, probably like Cavendish again, where you end up with them claiming they've got a complex hypothesis because they've got more than one independent variable, and ultimately speaking, because they're going to claim they've got more than one independent variable, you go, so that at best, this can give you a correlation result. I mean, it's totally invalid from the start with Cavendish anyway, but often they will use what is in essence a mathematical correlation. Wasn't the one that you argued with GeoStreber, Betty?
Yeah, well, we also talked about that EOT effect, I think, and that was also something that they think that we spin because something happens with weight. It wasn't an experiment, by the way, but they make some strange, how do you say, the deductions? I don't know what the word is for that, but extrapolations from things that they discover.
No, they didn't even discover it. It was a graph that was conjured.
Yeah, exactly. yeah.
And then what they do is that they apply the math. In other words, if you have a disagreement about gravity and you don't agree with it, well, then what they'll do is point you to the equation as if that's proof. See the G? It's right there. That's their existence. The fact that they put a letter and threw it in an equation and made it look all real nice and typed up and saying that that's evidence. They are actually saying that there is evidence for gravity because it's in the equation. See, that's one of those sleight of hand tricks. You know, you take a little bit of truth and mix it with some fiction and there you go. Gravity doesn't exist just because you put it in the equation. First, you have to verify. You have to validate that first. And that's the step that they skipped in the scientific method. So they just declared gravity, and then they threw it in the equation, and next thing you know, it exists.
Yeah, it's just a description of an effect. That's all they got. Description of an effect. I can call it Dunkel-Slopelgerts. They don't have a cause, so it's nonsense. All right, ready to move on?
Yep.
All right, independent variables. We'll go through this real quick. Independent variable from Penn State is what is varied during an experiment. It is what an investigator thinks will affect the dependent variable. From Colorado State, independent variable, the manipulated variable. Variable changed by the scientist, what the investigator is testing. From the University of North Carolina, in an experiment, the independent variable is the variable that is varied or manipulated by the researcher. And the dependent variable is the response that is measured. An independent variable is the presumed cause, whereas the dependent variable is the presumed effect. The IV is the antecedent, whereas the DV is the consequent. Now remember, viable independent variables must satisfy 3 criterion. We've been saying this over and over again. It must be varied and manipulated. So they got that on the brain, but they forget the main part. It is your presumed cause. So you can't forget this. We can vary and manipulate a lot of things, but they ain't causing anything. So it's 3 of them. The presumed cause, the researcher must be able to vary and manipulate it, and it must demonstrably exist before you use it in an experiment. All 3 criterion must be satisfied, not just one. What are not independent variables? I don't think that sounded very good. So what they are not: height, depth, width, length, i.e. distances, and time are not viable independent variables. I'll show you. Number 1, the submarine was crushed at a depth of 10,000 feet. Did depth cause the sub to implode, or was it pressure? Number 2, the gentleman was so obese he measured 1 meter wide. Did width cause the obesity, or was it laziness combined with excessive caloric intake? Number 3, over the course of the night, the sun suddenly appeared above the horizon. Did time cause the sun to appear above the horizon? Does time cause the difference of scores between the first and third quarters? So I don't know. It's pretty silly. If you can't see how silly these are, then I don't know what to tell you. All right, quick comments.
I can vary time because I can have a 5-minute interval or a 10-minute interval, and therefore I've varied time.
Great job.
Great job. Well, I think that there's one that wanted that time as an independent variable. It was Steve McRae that said, well, you can have time as an independent variable because if you have 2 petri dishes with the same stuff on it and you put them in the oven, and one you just put in the oven for an hour and the other for 3 hours, then time is the independent variable because that's the thing that you vary. And then you can see the results of that petri dish. That's what he brought up.
Let me get this straight. So what I said in irony and sarcasm, he actually formulated into a point.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, he needs time as an independent variable because they believe in evolution, right? So that makes it time causes change.
Oh, not
That's
bending
it.
of space-time then?
Sorry?
Not the bending of space-time causing gravity?
It's
Well,
similar.
that's another subject. I mean, they deal with the subject of evolution, so they wanted their time to do that first. So they pick
But-
everything apart, and this is one of the arguments that he made to me. And I said, well, aren't you just observing stuff happening?
But why would he be
It's the same thing
formulating...
like watching a tree all year round, seeing leaves fall and stuff. And did time cause the leaves to fall off the tree, right?
But why would he be formulating it into an actual hypothesis? I mean, in so doing, is that not an overt concession that it is a requirement to establish an empirical cause of an effect? Because obviously, by the sounds of things, he's at the stage where he's trying to formulate it and claiming that time is a variable that causes biological changes, as farcical as that is. But nonetheless, he's trying to formulate this into a hypothesis, right?
Yeah, but he didn't get any further than that. I mean, he didn't understand that the process that was happening in the petri dish, that was the thing that he wants to ascertain, not the time that it causes something. I mean, that's just data, that's just research.
But you know, with that example, let's just say that you leave something in an oven for an hour, but if you leave it in the oven for 3 hours, it burns. Well, that's just like saying that time causes burns.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't think
time
that's
causes basically everything. So we have
right.
found our cause for the effect, time.
No, but right. But
You can
what I'm
stop right
saying,
there.
what I'm saying is that he's not. That's not making any sense in his scenario because time doesn't cause burns.
Yeah, exactly.
No, Slick James. No, contradictions are allowed in their worldview. So you're way off base.
Oh, my fault.
And also what they do is with height, for example, they want to use height for the all kinds of independent variables. How about parallel lines or the, how do you say those lines around the Earth, the sort of contrived conventions
Oh,
that they
they
have
want to say
with
that a
that.
latitude line causes something.
Yeah. If you put the pendulum, the Foucault's pendulum, on a different latitude or longitude line, then it will cause this. It will do something else, whatever. That's also what they claim that happens, right? So they think that location is also an independent variable because you manipulate that position, the location.
Well, they have to demonstrably exist, right? That's one of the criterion. Does latitude's line demonstrably exist besides in people's imaginations?
Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I'll get you to summarise all this at the end, John, because we've talked in sort of sarcasm and stuff. But, well, yes, they do exist. They exist on maps, John, don't they now?
I'm sorry.
Well, I want you to correct me, and then at the end we'll summarise without all the sarcasm and devil's advocate.
Well, they exist on. That's a reification fallacy because they don't exist. I mean, they're just made up in people's imaginations, right? Right? They're based on the sky.
Yeah.
So, I think this is dead.
Right, that's what I wanted. Exactly. Take me to your latitude line, please. Can you show it me? What's that you say? It's not actually there in the bit of ocean that's on the map? Oh, right. So what use is that then? So I don't know I know this has been a longer point than the rest of them, John, but if you may, can you just summarise what is not, again, just so it's not shrouded in a bit of sarcasm?
Yeah, sure. So height, depth, width, length, like I said, those are distances, right? So they're not viable independent variables because they don't meet the criterion above, my 3 criterion I put down here, right? Time doesn't meet it either. You can't vary and manipulate a concept. You just can't do it. So it doesn't meet that criteria. It's not a cause of anything. Time is the conceptual medium in which all of the things in what we call the universe take place in. That's it.
Yeah, you did use time also for these sort of studies where they try to ascertain people's intelligence, for example, and they say, well, so many people do the test in this amount of time, and like that, right? So, but it's a different kind of study, but they bring that up also with the time being that independent variable.
Right. All right, we good?
Yep.
Nathan?
Yep.
All right, null hypothesis, right? From California State University to do a hypothesis test, that is an experiment, you will actually have two hypotheses, the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, which are stated in such a way that they are mutually exclusive. That is, you can't have both hypotheses be true. The null hypothesis is the conclusion that is considered the default. You will accept this hypothesis if you fail to find sufficient support for the alternative hypothesis, right? Null hypothesis from sciencenotes.org. The zero difference or no difference, i.e. null hypothesis, predicts that changing one variable, the independent variable, will have no effect on the variable being measured, the dependent variable. That is, you have to have an independent variable for the null hypothesis. It's just as simple as that. The entire goal is to falsify or reject the null hypothesis. Well, how do we do that? Well, we validate and confirm the alternative, right? So when people go around and say, oh, science, that's all they're interested in is the falsifying things. Yeah, it's to falsify the null hypothesis. And how do you do that? Well, you prove, confirm, or validate this guy, right? So I'm going to show you this. So let's go through one real quick. Observe a natural phenomena. Healthy type 1 diabetics suffer from diabetic ketoacidosis, apparently from the absence of adequate insulin on board. So the alternative hypothesis. Given otherwise healthy type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. That's the alternative. The null, given other healthy-wise type 1 diabetes patients, the lack of insulin will not, right? That's all the change is. It's from will to will not lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. It's just that simple. So how are we going to falsify or reject this hypothesis? Well, we prove this. It's just that simple. The dependent variable, the effect is, or the prediction, diabetic ketoacidosis. Independent variable or the cause is the insulin / lack of. This is very easy. You prove this through experiment, which rejects and falsifies this. So you're not just interested. It's not in a vacuum, in other words. They're connected by the lips. So that's all ridiculous. We're just out there to disprove things. Nonsense. Wiki parroters. In conclusion, very good slide right here. I think it provides a good overview. So the alternative hypothesis is the independent variable plus the dependent variable, the cause and the effect, equals prediction of cause and effect. The null hypothesis is the independent variable plus dependent variable equals prediction of no cause and effect. And the experiment is the independent variable plus the dependent variable plus what? Well, you just add the control variables. They're the same ones that come from the alternative hypothesis. They're not new ones. We just don't pop up with a new thing. It goes systematically, right? It's a prediction of cause and effect. Simple. Good? Quick comments, questions?
You want to go first, Slick or Betty?
No, it's clear for me.
Sounds clear to me.
Oh, well, I definitely want to add something to that. Okay, so yes, there's plenty of people out there that I've had it in comments for years, which is to say that you are only trying to achieve falsification in science. You're only trying to disprove things. Now, John and I had a conversation about this earlier, and it's a necessity for the pseudoscience pretender clowns to have wiggle room to change things at a later date. So it is a useful narrative to have out there that science isn't interested in proving things. In fact, science doesn't prove things. Well, let's stamp that on its head. It absolutely proves things. It proves your alternative hypothesis if you've got it correct, because you've got the other side of it, the bit that John's just gone through, the null. So if you've made a prediction, this is also a reason why a hypothesis is absolutely not a description of something. It's a scientific prediction. Sorry, you gave me the word for this yesterday, John.
The supposition.
There you go. It's a supposition. Exactly. So it's your supposition, not your explanation. So your supposition contains two sides in this instance. In which instance? What's that you say? A scientific prediction, otherwise known as hypothesis. One side says, I presume this causes that effect. And when you go forth to your experiment stage, you'll vary that which you presume causes the effect. And upon varying and manipulating it, if it causes the effect, then you validate your alternative hypothesis. You prove the cause of the effect. Now, like John, I'm not going to go into the validation by systematic experimentation and repeatability, because this is the core of it if you've got it correct. It is validated by other people also doing the same thing, varying that which you presumed caused the effect, and they also vary that and cause the effect. So that's the systematic bit, but I'll brush over that to say that the other side is the null, the bit where you say the complete contrast. If I vary this, it does not cause that. So when you perform your experiment, one side of your supposition or other will be validated. You will validate that you got it right if you vary and manipulate your presumed cause and get the effect, or you'll validate your null, which is to say you varied it, or as Anthony puts it, you wiggled it and you got no difference. You wiggled it and nothing happened. Well, one or other's going to get validated at the end, which is why it gets hijacked. It's empirical. Well, that's why it's useful to assert when looking at a light in the sky and claiming it's a gas in a vacuum to say science, because this method has an empiricism to its heart. That's why they've hijacked it. And following on the theme of this particular show, when you take a citation of somebody who is, in some instances, a pretender clown pseudoscientist, and they are utilizing this empirical method in their vernacular, it does not mean that you take the entirety of what they say in the whole paragraph simply because they have decided to utilize the empiricism that is so useful when asserting nonsense. That's it.
Well said. Okay, we ready to move?
Yeah.
Go, go,
Go
go.
ahead.
All right. Very important statement right here. Common mistakes in applying the scientific method. You see that there's no S over here, okay? Again, from the physics lab at University of Rochester, the most fundamental error is to mistake the hypothesis, right, for an explanation of a phenomenon without performing experimental tests. Sometimes common sense and logic tempt us to believe that no test is needed. There are numerous examples of this dating from the Greek philosophers to present day. So, read this closely now. The hypothesis isn't an explanation, right? It's a supposition. But guess what we get? We don't even get the hypothesis. We just get an explanation. All that the ball-tard surfers and evolutionists, they love this, whatever that is. All they have is an explanation. That's just a just so story that they mindlessly parroted from their pseudoscience priests or their churches, Wiki Google, right? They don't even have this. They have only this, no experiment, no hypothesis, and they call it science. It's preposterous, right? Quickly, before we get to peer review, any comment?
I'm actually good.
I'm good.
All right.
Maybe repeat it anyway then, John. Just repeat it again, because it is outrageous, right? That's the crux of it. I've got nothing to add in terms of anything because you've said it all, but maybe just repeat it, because this is it, right?
Okay. Common mistakes in applying the scientific method. It's real easy. The most fundamental error is to mistake the hypothesis for an explanation of a phenomenon without performing experimental tests, right? All we get is this, right? We don't even get a hypothesis. All we get offered is an explanation or a just so story. And then they call it science. That's not science. It's not science. You have to give us the hypothesis. Then you have to validate that explanation by systematic experimentation. Case closed. End of story. There's no discussion here.
I will add one thing to it. I've thought of something. So go and ask Sly. Ask him for his hypothesis. He's got an experiment on his hands. He's telling people he's got an experiment. He's solicited funds for it. Demand the hypothesis.
You ain't gonna get one. All right, you good? Oh, everyone good?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. We haven't gone over this one before, just in the back channels, just discussing it. So I thought I'd put it in here, and somebody requested it. So peer review. Well, what is it? There's different types of peer review. I've been through the peer review process in my profession. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a specific type. So what they're saying is they need peer-reviewed research when their backs up against the wall. We need peer-reviewed scientific research. You've heard this before. Everyone's heard this before. So what are they exactly talking about when they're saying peer review, right? Well, these institutions and publishing houses like Nature, Royal Society, Science, there's many of them. They have on staff experts, quote unquote, in certain fields. So what happens, most of the time, anyone can submit their research to these organizations. You'll have to check on submitting for each one of them, right? That's not the point of the discussion. So what they have are referees. And all they do is take this study, just the paper, right? And they go in their little corner in their room with coffee breath with a highlighter. There's no experiments being repeated, even if these things don't even have experiments in them for the most part. We'll get to that. But what they do is they just highlight things that are not in accordance with their standards, wherever they come from, probably from the editor, right? And what they do is they highlight them. They often send them back to the researcher, say, go ahead and fix this stuff to a certain standard. They fix them, they send them back, and then the peers say, okay, good. It's good to go for inclusion. They send it to the editor, and the editor says, okay, peer reviewers are good. This looks good, good to go. Now, if you're a specific journal, let's say you're an evolutionary journal, and a research paper comes in, evolution, whatever that is, and a research paper comes in and it goes against evolution, do you think that the peer reviewers are going to let it pass by? I don't think so. So let's summarize this. Peer review is the antithesis of actual science. Number one, show the peer review step in the scientific method. Good luck with that one. Number two, the scientific method was created to rid the landscape of bias. That's loudest voices, ruling classes, majority, votes, consensus, opinions, the subjective, in other words, by instituting a method solely focused on the objective, the empirical, observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable. That's the entire goal of the scientific method. The spinning space monkeys mindlessly appeal to it because it's the only way they can get their fairy tales into the mix, whereby bastardizing it. Number three, Catholic priests have also been banking on their internal peer review for centuries. Baltard science, that is religion, has much in common with theirs. Number four, Richard Smith, MD, former editor of the British Medical Journal. That's pretty high one right there, folks. Let me tell you that. Has claimed that peer review is ineffective, largely a lottery, anti-innovatory, slow, expensive, wasteful of scientific time, inefficient, easily abused, prone to bias, unable to detect fraud, and irrelevant. I don't know what to tell you, folks. Number 5, from Courtney, comments regarding on the nature of science et al. The author describes the three-legged stool of scientific error correction as experimental care, reproducible experiment, and peer review. Like Occam's razor, which it doesn't have anything to do with science either. That's another subject. Peer review is a temporal expedient for judging scientific work at any given time. Peer review serves the temporal interest of the publishers, funding agencies, and employers. The ultimate arbiter of scientific validity is repeatable experiment alone. Study was done by Wharton School in Connection, University of Pennsylvania, Professor J.J. Armstrong, 2017. The title of the paper: fewer than 1% of papers in scientific journals follow the scientific method. I mean, that is absolutely unbelievable. You don't have to take their word for it. Just pull up NCBI database or Google Scholar, any database for that matter, and just start picking out studies. And what you do is you pick them out and you either you hit the find button, like I showed you how to do that before, right? Find variables, hypothesis, right? Any of those two words, guess what you're going to get? A big fat 0 of 0. How in the world can you have a scientific paper without variables or hypothesis in it? Somebody, please tell me. Must be some new type of science. The only aspect that should be expertly reviewed should be whether or not the researchers did what? Followed the scientific method, for crying out loud. Listen, you follow the scientific method, you're good to go. Who cares what your results tell us, as long as they're validated by experiment? You did it. Now, a review of the experimental design is called for, right? But that's what they should do. It should be positioned right above the abstract, and it should look like this. The scientific method, it should list all of these. To the right, it should provide a short synopsis of what it actually is. Too easy, right? Right above the abstract. If they're not listed or are incoherent, then hasta la vista, baby. That's how we clean this mess up. And that ain't going to happen. Of course, then NCBI database will have like 3 or 4 studies in it. Astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology, theoretical physics will take their rightful place at the bottom of the sci-fi section. Paleontology, archaeology, anthropology, geology will take their rightful place besides photography and bag of hammers observations. And evolution will take its rightful place in religious studies, myths and fairy tales, just below Humpty Dumpty. Will people lose their jobs? Yep. But hey, we still need people to pick up trash. So it's not a lost cause. All right, quickly, comments.
Oh man,
that last bit was really hilarious, by the way.
Well, this is the bit I want to cover, and you're saying quickly. Have you got lots more to cover? Because this is the bit I want to focus on. So can you scroll back up to point 1 in the paragraph before, at the start of this section that you just did? Here we go. Right. So just read it again, and then that will hopefully spur a bit of conversation.
Point 1, peer review is the antithesis of actual science. Number 1, show the peer review step in the scientific method.
All right, hold on. I'm going to preface this. Listen up. Right, this that John's about to read, this is the essence of how we've been deceived. What we take as read, what we take as accepted fact. So if you can just read point 2.
The scientific method was created to rid the landscape of bias. That is, loudest voices, ruling class, the majority, votes, consensus, opinions. The subjective, in other words, by instituting a method solely focused on the objective, that is the empirical. What does empirical mean? It means observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable. The entire goal of the scientific method. What happens here is people mindlessly appeal to it because it's the only way to get their fairy tales into the mix, whereby bastardizing it.
Right.
Good?
Absolutely. This to me is the essence of the how. How do we come to believing we've got lights in the sky that are actually gases in vacuums? How do we come to believe that we're on a spinning space rock flying through a vacuum? How do we come to believe all this? Well, it's been taught to us in a classroom with the banner of science, where they explicitly tell you what science is so that you understand what John has just explained. It's empirical. So if you are to attribute your nonsense and get it believed, then you've got to bastardize this method, this empirical method, in order for people, because they've been taught at a very early age, to understand that you're proving something when you assert science. So this maybe leads us on a little bit as a panel to talk about where people will blame science. So again, I've got to, singling people out. I'm under the firing line as it is, so who cares? If Jaron's listening at the moment, don't take this personally. That's the first thing. You do it, I do it, and everybody does this. They blame science. They say science has led us to the belief that we have lights in the sky that are gases in vacuums. Well, no. Science has definitely not done that. The bastardization of science has done that. The pseudoscience pretender clown muppets have done that. The people who need their fairy tales to be believed, they're the people who will invoke science when they haven't utilized science, this method that gives you an empirical result. So you end up with the Geological Society quoting very boldly that experimentation is the arbiter of everything. Paraphrasing. But they do that so that when they assert their nonsense, they can get it through to the audience, or the reader in this instance, that they're proving things. And they've got something that's empirical. So they're going to evoke this language so that you, the reader, or you, the listener, or you, the viewer, understand that something's being proven. Well, the understanding that something's being proven is where the deception lies. That's the point. That's what we're all doing here. So if we don't understand this, then we're screwed. I think, fortunately, thanks to people like Flat Earth Reset, which is why I'm smirking about this, some of the stupid people in this community understand this at a fundamental level, to the point where they can poke fun out of Anthony O'Reilly, Sleeping Warrior, about his use of the word experiment when describing a gyroscope. So if somebody like Flat Earth Reset can highlight that Anthony's also using the hijacking of science and calling a gyroscope an experiment when it is not, then laugh about it, then I suspect that there's a huge number of people watching, or that this information will permeate to, that do definitely get this. This is how we've been lied to. This is how all the people on John's list, let's bring up the screen again. So this is how all of these people, the loudest voices, the ruling classes, the majority, the consensus, the people with the opinions, this is how they tell you what's what. And all they needed was a couple of magic words like experiment or science to do it. Doesn't mean that science has duped us. Science is a method, if applied, that gives you an empirical result. So that's just a useful magic trick for somebody who hasn't got that to say that they have. That's all that's occurring. That's all that's happening. That's how we've been deceived. So this, for me, is a really, at least at the moment, it may be that we move on to the why of the lie later stage. But for me, this is the how of the lie, right? This is how they've duped us. They being people, just other men and women like us, who just want power.
Yeah, or were indoctrinated already, I think, with what science is not. Yep.
When you get a second, I'd like to make a statement, but it's a little bit off topic of science, so I want to make sure that John is done first before I do it.
Yeah, can we save that to the end?
Yep.
Okay, can we move on?
Yes.
Yep.
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. Let's see what we got next. Oh, yeah, this is one of my favorites. So, typical baller parrots. Science never proves things. I think we already went over this, right? Number one, then why would anyone do it? And we got, thousands of citations. I don't even know why I need to provide citations for this stuff. Why do I even need to do it? Science is self-correcting. Well, this is a reification fallacy because science isn't a self. It doesn't have a self. Science is always changing. Well, science is the scientific method. Has the scientific method changed? I don't think so. So the question is, why do they say this stuff? Why do they mindlessly parrot this from Wiki? They're belling, laughing, fallacious train wrecks. I'm sure you can see why. They need the flexibility when their previous just so stories that were being peddled as science get pummeled, right? They can just pivot and say, well, see, science correcting itself. I mean, unbelievable. And the poster child and undisputed champion of the world, the House of Mirrors, incoherent fog, shapeshifter, evolution. Let's give it a big round of applause. There isn't anything that describes evolution better than this. Now, I could put about 30 reasons or 30 examples down here, but I just thought with punctuated equilibrium, right? This is no change. This was proffered by Gould and Eldridge back in the day when they figured out, 80 years after everyone else figured out that Darwin's little speculations weren't coming true. So they decided, okay, punctuated equilibrium, plug that hole, we're good to go, right? Well, what's this? It's called an ad hoc hypothesis. What's an ad hoc hypothesis? Well, it's one created to explain away facts that seem to refute one's belief or theory. That's colloquial theory, too, because that's what evolution. Now, I don't even think it's colloquial. It's a colloquial fairy tale. Ad hoc hypotheses are common in paranormal research and in the work of what? Who? Pseudoscientists. From your alma mater wiki, an ad hoc hypothesis is a hypothesis added to a theory, that's colloquial theory or speculation, in order to save it from being falsified. Yeah, there's the poster child right there, brother. If anybody out there listening in YouTube land, you feel like taking the Pepsi challenge, come on over. Go ahead and drop a letter to Nathan. See if you can take the Pepsi challenge with me on evolution. Right? I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the supreme evolutionary biologist of the universe. I want you. Come on here. Right? It'll be 5 minutes. Do we want to say anything quick on this?
Not me.
Okay.
Yeah, just carry on.
No. Self-explanatory, I think.
Hashtag comment now.
Mhm.
Okay, we good, Nathan?
Yeah, just carry on as is. I've still got you presented.
All right. Another subject that come up. This is very important. I think it came up on the show the other day. The colloquial use of theory. So from your dictionary, theory is just a mere conjecture or a guess. That's all it is. So what they do is they equivocate it by dropping the term theory. Well, they're not talking about a scientific theory. They're talking about this guy. Well, this guy from University of Rochester Physics Labs, a scientific theory represents a hypothesis or group of related hypotheses which has been confirmed through repeated experimental tests. This is much different than this one out there, isn't it? And can somebody please tell me what are some synonyms for the word confirmed or validated is? I'll tell you, proof, evidence.
I just wanted to go say it.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
Right? Can't have an actual scientific theory without it already being validated or confirmed by experiment or hypothesis tested. You can't have a theory. You can't say, okay, we developed a theory and now we're going to test. We're going to see if we can test and see if it's true. No. That's backwards. The hypothesis comes first. A scientific theory is the end result of the scientific method, not the beginning. For goodness sakes. Okay, we're getting to the meat here. This is one of my favorite subjects coming up. So let me stop here. Anything to say about that equivocation fallacy?
Yeah, I think you've summarised it nicely. It's ass about face if people say theory and then move on to an experiment. Ultimately speaking, the entire scientific basis is hypothesis driven, right? So you're going to be experimenting, but your experiments are based on hypothesis. So everything's driven from hypothesis. So the end result of that, i.e. a scientific theory, is going to have been the result of multitudes, potentially, of hypothesis tests. That's what gives you scientific theory. So when people use this colloquial theory, it's like, well, I can come up with a mystic Meg theory, look into a crystal ball after gathering a little bit of information from a client and give you a theory. But that definitely isn't the same as systematic experimentation based on hypothesis being used cumulatively to present a scientific theory. That's very different. Very, very different indeed.
All right, we good?
Yeah, you're still presented.
Law versus scientific theory. I love this one because this one, you want to get some more panties in a bunch. Just wait. So, law versus scientific theory. Scientific theories explain the how and the why, the mechanisms and the process, and identifies the cause, right? Like germ theory. Scientific theories are the result of validated, confirmed scientific hypotheses, like we just showed you above, right here. Validated, confirmed scientific hypotheses, right? They go through and are rigorously tested by experiment, i.e. the scientific method. Okay, as opposed to scientific laws. Scientific laws describe the what and the is. The cause is not applicable. Uh-oh, that should be sending up red flags for you. They are based solely on observations, often expressed mathematically, like the second law of thermodynamics. I mean, you can state it verbally. You can also, there's also equation for the second law of thermodynamics, a number of them. With scientific laws, the cause and the why, the mechanism, how and the why, like I said, are both nonsensical and invalid inquiries. It's just an is and an are. For example, how or why does heat flow from hot to cold always? Well, we don't know, and we'll never know. All we know every single time it just does and is. Ergo, a scientific law. That's why they're called the laws of thermodynamics and not the theories of thermodynamics. Scientific laws never become scientific theories or vice versa. Each are domain specific inherently. Well, after that little discussion, what should be your next question? Or challenge or inquiry? I'll just give it to you quick. Well, what makes the laws of physics scientific? I'll tell you, not a damn thing. Scientific laws, that is, the laws of physics, are not scientific. This is a misnomer. They're merely descriptions, often expressed mathematically, of plain old observations of nature. The scientific method, however, is employed to elucidate and explain cause and effect, the hows and whys, not describe the what's and the ises. Anybody can do that. Any village idiot can give you a description, right? Scientific laws, I'm still using scientific for a point because you already know that it's a misnomer, but there's an ends to the means here. Scientific laws only breach the first step of the scientific method, observe a phenomena. You can't formulate a scientific hypothesis because a viable cause or independent variable doesn't exist. It's forever illusory. I'm Max Tegmark. I'm MIT physics professor. We humans have gradually discovered that many additional recurring shapes and patterns in nature involving not only motion and gravity, but also areas as disparate as electricity, magnetism, light, heat, chemistry, radioactivity, and subatomic particles. These patterns are summarized by what we call our laws of physics. In the same reference, when we look at reality through the equations of physics, what? Reality through equations. Equations aren't reality. Equations, mathematics, are abstract. So that's a train wreck. We find that they describe the patterns and regularities. So all they're doing is describing patterns and regularities. Therefore, the laws of physics are mathematical, i.e., descriptions of mere observations of what? The laws of nature. That's all they are. But wait a second, my son is a video game master champion. He can readily recognize and describe the recurring patterns and regularities present in the game, all the while being absolutely clueless about the underlying architecture or software of the game. But he intuitively knows that the patterns and regularities in the game are not the cause of the game. And is my 10-year-old a scientist? Sorry, 12-year-old. How can the laws of physics, descriptions of patterns and regularities in nature via equations, have anything whatsoever to do with the scientific method, that is science, when the scientific method is solely based on hypothesis testing, which is only employed to explain cause and effect relationships, the hows and the whys? Describing only focuses solely on the whats and the ises. Explanations focus solely on the whys and the hows. There's a huge difference between describing something and explaining cause and effect, like actual hypothesis testing experiments. Watching heat flow from hot to cold or gases flow from high pressure to low pressure isn't an experiment. It's merely observing a phenomenon. Have the laws of motion ever caused a single billiard ball to move across the table? No, it's inane. This story begins and ends at the first step of the scientific method. Is that science? Nope. But we can predict. Oh, really? So, after observing heat flow from hot to cold a few billion times, that's the second law of thermodynamics without fail, you scientifically predict, genuflect, that if I set my scalding hot cup of coffee on the table for 20 minutes, it's going to get cooler? Wow, a seer. Thanks, Captain Obvious. You must be a scientist. A complete moron at the beginning of time could have reached the same conclusion in a coma. Basket weaving is more scientific than scientific laws. They just throw the term scientific in front of the word law by mere fiat without any warrant whatsoever. It's a turkey squirrel scenario. Because I could just throw turkey in front of this, so it's a turkey squirrel. Then what do? Well, since heat flows from hot to cold always, describe it using equations, then pronounce from the rooftops, this is scientific law, i.e. science, we're genuflecting again. This is second grade slick. It greases the skids for their propaganda efforts with Joe Coffey and Betty Breadmaker, the masses of the scientific illiterate public, to now put the term scientific in front of just about anything for veracity and validation, like they do here. Evolutions, big bangs, multiverses, black holes, gravity, gravy waves, dark matter, spinning balls. Do you see the game? In conclusion, file 13, the term scientific with laws, a belly laugher, it's incoherent, it doesn't fit. All they are simply natural laws. Now, understand something. I didn't say that the natural laws were not true. I just said that they weren't scientific, right? So don't misconstrue what I'm saying here. Just don't put the term scientific in front of it because it's not scientific. Doesn't make it untrue or false. Have a nice day. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on this?
Can you edit your thing on the fly?
Say again?
Can you edit this on the fly?
Can I edit it? Like
Yeah.
put something in there? Yeah.
Scroll up maybe a little bit. Scroll up until I say stop. There we go. Scroll down. No, too far. Scroll down. You've got a little list of things that are attributed with the word science. Here we go. Big Bang. What we've got? Multiverses, black holes, gravity. Can you add ether in there?
Sure, no problem.
Not either. Is that the right spelling of ether?
Ether, they're spelled a couple of different ways. I guess you can go this way too. I've seen it spelled multiple ways.
Yeah, I like the second one. Let's leave ether in there, if you don't mind.
Let's see what it says here. Ether. No, it goes back to my first one. So let's just,
I don't know. I've never double-checked the correct spelling of that particular pseudoscience.
Yeah. Well, like I said, all they do is and it's the same thing we've been talking. It's about the same thing we're preaching, right? They're just using the name. This is a perfect analogy, a perfect facsimile of what the overall problem is, right? They're just using the word. They're taking the word and they're superimposing it on something just by fiat, but it doesn't really have anything to do with it. It's second grade linguistic trixies, right? And adults are being fooled by it because they don't know what science is. That's the problem. Go ahead.
Well, natural laws get called science. So while a natural law, as you correctly identify, could be described as an observed phenomena, you then have this juxtaposition between things that are also unexplained natural phenomena like the stars, and then they call that science in astrophysics.
Yeah, they're guilty of the game. Hold on one second.
My point being that this is where the circle of the hijacking maybe comes in. I'm spitballing off the top of my head, but when you have things that are simply natural laws, as you say, the answer to why your hot cup of coffee gets cold when you leave it on the side for 20 minutes is never going to be answered. You're never going to establish that cause of that phenomenon, but you are going to have the question, and you can declare it as so. In the same way, you can also, as I say, contrasting it or juxtaposing it, you've got the phenomenon of something that occurs in the sky. And you can say, well, that's always occurring, and I can predict it, the same as I can predict the second law of thermodynamics will always occur. Look, I've observed it several million times happening. Therefore, guess what? If I predict that will happen when I set the coffee down, then I've just done science, because it's a scientific law. Well, no, it's a law of nature. Maybe that's part of the hijacking, because then you can have, like I say, Neil deGrasse Tyson declare what's going on in the sky, because it's always occurring. It's secular.
Yeah, I'm back. Anything else?
Did you not hear a word of that?
Yeah, I did. I was listening to it in the background. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
This is it. I want to focus on the hijacking of science. It's something that's so critical, and literally on a more daily basis. It's like when you first came to Flat Earth and you started seeing heliocentric programming. You couldn't not see it. It's on the side of every bus and every phone booth and every building and every poster, and suddenly you notice it everywhere. Now I'm doing that with this. So you hear the claims that people make that have the science attached to them. And I mean, there's been people on comedy shows, I remember maybe it's probably 10 years ago now, that you had comedians on the circuit that were joking about, Pantene or whatever hair care product, where they're talking about, now comes the science bit. And they start talking about, in a way you go, well, they're probably more scientifically valid, because there's a reasonable chance that in the chemistry process they might have at some stage established the cause and effect with scientific validity, right? But thereafter, to say that, well, because of science you can have more shiny hair, it just becomes laughable, right?
Yeah, there's a means to an end there, right? They use that term, like you said. This is the poster child of the whole entire problem of how we got here in the first place. We got here by people using the term science to grease the skids of their fairy tales. No one checked up on them, right? And then they cloud everything with mathematics because that's sort of a barrier because most people can't do those mathematics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little barrier there. I just don't. I don't know how people haven't caught on to it sooner. Maybe they didn't. We're just silenced. But this stuff isn't that hard. It's not that hard to discover if you know what you're looking for. You got to know what science is to begin with, because if you don't know that, then yeah, they're gonna buffalo you. It's over for you.
Okay,
But
well,
if only 1% is really a scientific paper that is being using the scientific method, how many garbage is there then that's not validated at all?
more than
Okay.
99% of what is claimed to be science, and this is just in the papers that are published. Forget about
Exactly.
what people say on YouTube or claim. This
So
is
how
the
much
actual
overwhelm-
published papers. Less than 1%. Less than
Yeah.
1. So 99% plus of what's published isn't
Yeah,
adhering
But
to the
isn't
scientific
that
method.
amazing? I mean, isn't that amazing that? And I can understand then why people say, well, if you have to throw out 99%, then what do we really know? And people don't want to accept that bit, I think, because people want their world
Answer that
explained.
rhetorical question, Betty. Answer that rhetorical question for us. What do we really know if 99% of it is nonsense?
I think that we are just we have to start all over, basically. And I think that we're not able to answer every question that there is.
Well, I'm going to answer it. Very little is what
Yes,
we know,
exactly.
in all honesty.
Almost
Very,
nothing.
very little. And understanding our own ignorance is a very good place to start. And
Yeah.
the contrast to understanding your own ignorance is accepting the word of priests.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of humbling, isn't it? To accept that we really don't know anything.
Depends on your attitude. Humbling for you, exciting for me, terrifying for most people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and people have much invested. People are also in certain jobs that they have studied for and have invested in so many ways in what they do and what they know. And if that knowledge is not knowledge, but mostly assumptions, that really will rock your world. I mean, that would tear the rug under your feet away. I mean, then what's there then? What's left? And I think that terrifies people.
You want to add anything to that, Slick? If not, I've got a question from someone in the chat.
Well, no, I just want to wait until you're finished with the science because what I have is just a little bit off topic.
Well, I will ask this one question because it might round it out. So, Numinum asks, who was the author to define quote-unquote science, question mark?
There wasn't one single author. I mean, if you had to single out somebody, probably Sir Francis Bacon. But there have been many, many people that contributed to the scientific method. It's quite easy. It's the method is logical. However, the results need not be and often are not.
Right, Slick, you go ahead. You've got the mic, mate.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to bring this up because we were talking earlier about how there's this sleight of hand thing going on with mainstream. And if you listen to people talk and listen to them closely, even in that documentary that they made, the first thing they do with flat earth people or anybody that's inquiring, they'll always say things, well, flat earth people, they've got mental health issues, and they kind of want to have a sense of belonging, because they feel lost and they kind of got this flat earth thing to kind of hold on to, so the point that I'm making is that when you make statements like that, you automatically set us up for being behind as soon as the conversations start. See, this is done purposely so that we cannot be heard and so that a fight will ensue and you'll have all kind of arguments. Now, I hope I'm sounding coherent because before this hangout, I was involved in a 5-hour conversation. that ended up with me and Rumpus, and there were some other people involved, so I might be a little bit incoherent here. But the point that I'm making is that when you start us off with those kind of things, when we get into conversations with people, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, "You're an idiot." See? So what ends up happening is you can go one or two ways. You can go back at them and say, "You're an idiot." And now all of a sudden, all you have is a war on who's the biggest idiot. So what I did today was, when I was in this conversation with these people, I absorbed all of that, how much I'm an idiot, how stupid I am, and I just stayed on topic. So what ended up happening was I stuck to my argument and I just stuck to my points. I didn't call anybody any names. I just took it all in. Now, into about the third hour of this discussion, all of a sudden there was no more name calling. Believe it or not, Rumpus and I were having a conversation, an adult conversation, where we were understanding what each other was saying. But it had to get to that point. It had to take 2 or 3 hours to get past that point, what the mainstream has done to us by saying we are stupid people, we got mental health issues. See, so people start off with that on the mind. So the point that I'm trying to make is that if we can get past that, we can have an adult conversation. Because in this conversation that Rumpus and I had, when it was finally over, he made his points and I made mine. Now, we didn't agree with each other's points, but we had a conversation and we were able to understand each other from that. So the point that I'm trying to make is to all the people out there in flat earth, globe earth debate land. Have a conversation. The conversation doesn't have to start with "you're an idiot." No matter what these mainstream people say about us needing attention and we got mental health issues, don't listen to that, because that's just a trick. That's just a trick to get us to be behind the 8 ball before the game even starts. Now, I hope that was coherent, because I am extremely exhausted from that 5 hour conversation. And I just want to say shout out to Rumpus, because he made some really good points, and you don't usually expect a civil conversation, but we got one out of him today. That's
Shout
it.
out retracted.
Got out retracted.
And you all took the mic from me. Love it. Shout out retracted.
Yeah, you should have recorded it, James, because we've never heard from Rumpus. So
Well, what happened was, it started out on Jose's Hangout, and what it was basically me, and there was mostly there were Globe people, and there was one Flat Earth person that was giving me more flack than the Globe people. So anyway, I kind of just basically had to absorb it and just hang in there, because for the first hour and a half, they were over talking me. I was every kind of stupid moron that you could possibly imagine. See, but my point was, I just hung in there. I never called anybody a name back. I just kept presenting my argument. And one by one, everyone kept dropping off, because I wasn't falling for the "you're stupid" trick. See, so my point is, I forced them into a conversation. And we can do that. We can have a conversation, but we have to absorb all of these blows, because we've been set up as being stupid people. We are people that have mental health issues. We are people that need a sense of belonging. See, so this is what we have to fight to get past, just to have a civil conversation. So the point that I'm making is that we can do that. And to all flat earth people out there, globe earth people out there, the ones with level heads and the one that understand these things, start off a conversation and see how far you can go without insulting each other, and watch what you come up with.
I'm going to need Slick James Johnson's full name, because I'm nominating him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
yeah,
Are you just trying to trigger the audience now, John? Thanks for that. I'll field the comments on that one.
But I guess what I wanted people to know, that it's just not a war. This debate is not a war. It's a conversation. One side has a point of view and the other side has a point of view. There's nothing wrong with presenting those sides of views without forcing the other side to take yours. And that's the only point that I'm trying to make. I think we can get a lot farther if we just don't force our opinion on others, because that's what was happening today. They kept trying trying to impose their will on me, and it's not about opposing wills. It's about having a conversation, and that's all.
Yeah, there's certain people on the debates that will get a pass, and it's essentially for one reason. So if you want to know how you get this pass on, this will probably get used against me now. But essentially, if you concede your belief, you get a pass. So people like Zinder, when you actually put him up against the wall and say, well, do you have proof of the R value? He will say, no, I believe it's true. And in so doing, he gets a pass, because you can believe whatever you like, right? I don't care. If you want to believe you're on a spinning ball, good for you. I have a little saying for it. Go in peace, in R you trust. So, in so saying, I'm basically pointing out that you're entitled to your belief, right? Well, I would assert emphatically that I don't have a belief in the fact that the Earth is obviously and observably flat. The Earth is observably and obviously flat. So I'm not trying to force my beliefs upon people when I say those words. However, when you reify a model and demand that I accept your belief, it's a very different kettle of fish.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've taken to starting calling them what they are. They're fundamentalists in their beliefs. And, that gets shortened and thrown at people with a Christian faith more often than not, that they are, quote unquote, fundies. Well, what's a fundie? A fundamentalist, right? Well, somebody who has to reify a model and demand you accept it, that right there is a fundie.
Right, and I understand that, because that's basically what I keep getting hit with. You have to accept this, and then when I don't accept it, that's when well, you're using a computer, you're using, a phone. You shouldn't be questioning these things. But that's my whole point. I am questioning it, and I should be allowed to question it. Since when do we get to the point that just because something is written and it's got an equation attached to it, that I can't challenge it? See, you can challenge it if you want to. You can't say, no, you can't challenge it. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. Yes, I can challenge it. There's nothing wrong with that. If your argument holds up, then it'll hold up to my challenge. You don't have to barrage me with a whole bunch of how stupid an idiot I am, because, just present the argument and see if it holds up. Don't, that's all. And like I said, excuse me for this incoherent voice, but I'm so exhausted from that 5-hour session that I can barely hold my lips to form a word. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you more than I. In saying that, I've probably spent 20 to 30 hours in the company of Rumpus on the debate, so, I don't really envy you, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that was a long one. I was mentally exhausted after that. Oh my goodness.
Cool. Is there anything you want to add, Betty?
No, I think that we really covered many of things. Maybe one thing on Discord, we have a lot of people that we sort of battle with things, and they're beginning to get adjusted to the citation John brings, but then they bring citations of their own, and usually they are citations that are not from the real scientists that are the real scientists, right? So basically, these people do all kinds of appeal to authorities, but basically say that John is doing that. So a lot of fallacies also are being brought up in these discussions, and sometimes the whole discussion about the science is being lost by just explaining what the fallacy is that they fell into. I see that a lot happening. We're still trying to get these people to see what a citation is. That it is basically to back up what we're trying to get across here and what we see as science and as proof. And when we say, well, bring us your proof then with the globe, they can't come up with anything. That's hopefully if they will finally really listen instead of chatting away in the side chat, and because then everything get lost. They have to go through this again, and like James liked to say, well, first empty your head and then start over and trying to get this information in. First, try it on first before you eliminate it or dispose of it. That's what I would say to people that come across this information. Just empty your mind and just try to get this information in first and then see what you can do with it.
Certainly on some of the shows that John and I have done together, one of them covered fallacies, and as you rightly point out, they are intrinsically linked to, well, I was going to say this debate, but really any debate. It's picking apart where the argument is fallacious, and in the case of the natural world or the world, obviously it's going to be a science-related topic. So the two, i.e. science and fallacy, often go hand in hand, which gets frustrating when, from our side of this debate, we're trying to point out where a deception lies. And if you are going to use the very nature of said pretender clown muppet pseudoscientist as your citation, you've then got to pick that apart for its fallacy as opposed to its scientific validity. So the two are so tightly wound.
Yeah, true. So I've never learned so much about fallacies since I've been in these kinds of debates, and getting better and better at discovering when people do that. And people hate it usually when you point out their fallacies. So it's basically then it deteriorates to a sort of a victim mentality and saying, well, you do this and that, or they go over into ad homs and trying to insult you. That's usually what happens.
Can be fun, like with Bob the Fallacy guy. So different Bob the Science guy. I'll use his actual name so people know who I'm referring to. And he's trying to use the drop value, the old theodolite nonsense. In his case, he's trying to tie it back to a fixed point with the sextant. And he's saying that essentially his original definition is to beg the question and assume that what he's measuring to is the leading edge of a sphere. But because I point out his fallacy, begging the question, he then moves on to describing it as I've described it, which is the arbitrary point in the distance where the land meets the sky. Well, that is to say that the land never meets the sky. It will move as you move. But he tries to formulate his exact same example into that, which is an arbitrary point in the distance, and he can't do it. And when he's asked why he's doing this, he's like, well, I'm trying to get around the fallacy part, because I'll be accused of using a fallacy if I say it's the leading edge. But after about 20 minutes of doing it, there comes a point where he has to say it's the leading edge. In other words, they cannot not beg the question. Is that right? Too many negatives, I think. But they can't not beg the question. I think that's right. It's a bit late in the day. There we go, I'll rephrase it. They have to beg the question at some stage. In other words, at some point, he has to revert to, I'm measuring the leading edge of a sphere, that's what's dropping and blah, blah, blah. They have to assume their outcome at some stage. Which is to say that when we have these arguments with globeheads, ultimately speaking, that is the underlying truth here. That is the point. They must assume their outcome when they make these arguments. So it means that all of them fail. Well, what does that tell you? Well, it should tell you, you don't live on a spinning sphere. At the very least, that's what it should tell you. Aside from the very real axiom that the Earth is obviously and observably flat, if you're coming to this with the crazy notion that you live on a spinning sphere flying through a vacuum, then understand this. There is no way of providing any evidence whatsoever, let alone the scientific validity claimed with the sphere Earth model we are told we live upon. So there is no evidence for this, only fallacy, only to assume one's outcome in the example being set out. So, do you want to add anything, John? If not, we'll round out.
Yeah. One last thing. Do not hijack science to grease the skids for your parroted claims. I'm your Huckleberry. Your demise will be sure and quick. Thanks. Have a nice day.
Well, I'll add something to that as well, John. Yeah, if you are currently suffering your demise, not mentioning names, Bob Nodell, excuse me, then don't drag the the beheading out too much, because it just gets more and more painful, you know. Anyway, have you got anything to add, Slick?
I just want to unretract Rumpus's shout out. It was a really good conversation.
Unretraction, shout out, retracted. Anything to add, Betty?
That was really fast. No, it was very good. I think it took long enough, so I think that this is right, the way we did it. I think that a lot of questions were answered, and a lot of things were that we spoke about were, precisely made. So I think that I hope that people will watch this and again. If you don't get it, they are invited into my Discord server and discuss this. So if they want, I can provide a link that they can come into Discord and ask the questions, and John and I can maybe help with the answers.
Cool. Well, I'll do a couple of shout outs and then I'll round out the show. So shout out to Silver Umbrella, Yaya, Truth, Reality, Freedom, Richie, is it Ellison, Flat Earth Bear, Shatner's Bassoon for hitting the super chat. Really, really appreciate your support. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, I will say a huge, massive, enormous thank you to Slick James Johnson, Betty Van Velsen, and Quantum Eraser for joining us on this BALLBUSTERS special. This has been a particularly long one, even though this is only number 3, getting longer and longer as we go. Also, a massive thank you to all of you in the live audience for tuning in and hopefully sharing this live BALLBUSTERS. Be sure to like, comment, share and subscribe, and if you're watching this on Nathan Oakley channel, then stay tuned as there may be a short after show to follow. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you in the next BALLBUSTERS.